My name is Rachel. I am 33 years old, and until that afternoon, I thought my biggest problem was an overbearing mother-in-law. I work as a forensic accountant. My career is built on tracking dirty money and spotting the lies people hide in their balance sheets. Yet I had completely missed the financial rot spreading inside my own marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach toxic family members a lesson they will never forget. It was a freezing Saturday afternoon in late November. I was sitting at the granite kitchen island of the home I paid the mortgage on, reviewing a spreadsheet for a corporate audit. My husband, Derek, who is 35, was supposedly at his consulting firm. The house was quiet and I was focused. Then I heard the deadbolt click. I did not even look up before Brenda, my 62-year-old mother-in-law, marched into my kitchen. She never knocked. Derek had secretly given her a spare key, completely ignoring my boundaries. She dropped her designer handbag on the counter, her eyes zeroing in on me. She hated seeing me work. To Brenda, a woman's only purpose was to serve her husband. "I see you are still staring at that screen," Brenda snapped, crossing her arms. "Derek works hard all week to provide for you, and you cannot even be bothered to have a hot meal ready. The house is a mess." I took a deep breath. "Brenda, I am in the middle of a massive audit. Derek does not get home for 3 hours. Also, the house is perfectly clean." "Working?" she scoffed, stepping closer. "You call tapping on a screen working? My son is out there building an empire, and you are playing with numbers. Your job is to take care of him and me." I ignored her, turning my attention back to the spreadsheet. That was my first mistake. Brenda could not stand being ignored. In a flash of pure entitlement, she lunged forward. "You have to go cook and clean the house," she screamed, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "Take care of me and my son. Do not just sit around playing games." She snatched the phone out of my hand with such force that her sharp nails gouged a deep trench down my forearm. The pain was sharp. I stared at the bright red blood welling up on my skin. The disrespect had finally crossed the line to physical assault. Brenda stood there holding my phone, a triumphant smirk on her face. She expected me to cower. She expected me to scurry into the kitchen and prepare a meal. Instead, my chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor as I stood up. The cold, calculating side of my brain took over. "Give me the phone, Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Make me, you disrespectful brat," she spat back. "I am going to tell Derek how you treat his mother." I closed the distance between us in 1 second. My left hand clamped down on her wrist, forcing her fingers to drop my phone onto the counter. Simultaneously, my right hand grabbed a thick fistful of her hair. Brenda let out a piercing shriek of terror as I spun her around. "Let go of me!" she screamed, flailing her arms. "You are crazy!" I marched her straight down the hallway, my grip unyielding. She stumbled in her heels, her protests echoing off the walls, but I did not stop. I opened the heavy oak front door, shoved her out onto the freezing porch, and tossed her handbag out right after her. "Do not ever touch me again," I said, my voice cold as the winter air. I slammed the door in her face and threw the deadbolt. 5 seconds later, the violent pounding began. She slammed her fists against the wood, screaming that she was going to destroy my life, ruin my marriage, and have me thrown in jail. I calmly walked to the bathroom to clean the blood off my arm. The war had officially begun. 15 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser illuminated my living room windows. I wiped the blood from my arm, watching through the blinds as 2 officers stepped out. Brenda waited at the driveway, launching into the performance of a lifetime. Through the glass, I heard her theatrical sobbing. She clutched her chest, pointing a trembling finger at my door. I watched her pull her own hair, demonstrating how I supposedly attacked her. To them, I was a deranged lunatic who assaulted an innocent elderly woman checking on her son. I did not panic or rush outside to defend myself. In my line of work, you never interrupt someone weaving a trap for themselves. You wait for them to finish and present the paper trail. I opened my secure home network application on my iPad. The officers comforted Brenda for 5 minutes before walking up my front steps. A heavy knock echoed through the house. I unlocked the deadbolt, pulling the door open. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, keeping my voice steady. The older, stern officer stepped forward. "Ma, and we received a 911 call regarding a domestic disturbance. The woman outside claims you physically assaulted her and threw her out. Is that your mother-in-law?" "Yes, that is Brenda," I replied, stepping back to invite them into the foyer. "I did physically remove her from my property, but it was not unprovoked." I held out my right arm, displaying the deep, angry gouge her nails had left. The wound was still fresh and red. She broke into my home while I was working and attacked me when I asked her to leave. The second officer took out his notepad. "She claims she has a key and was invited over. She also stated she did not touch you until you attacked her." I nodded slowly. "People lie all the time, officer, which is why I rely on data. Please, step into my home office." I walked them down the hall, leaving Brenda standing on the lawn, glaring at me. My home office was strictly off-limits to everyone, including my husband. As a forensic accountant, I handle highly sensitive corporate tax files and confidential financial records for multi-million-dollar companies. Because of strict non-disclosure agreements, I had a hidden 4K security camera installed in the ceiling smoke detector. I placed my iPad on the desk and pressed play. "Gentlemen, this footage was recorded 20 minutes ago," I explained. The high-definition video filled the screen. It clearly showed Brenda letting herself into the house, but bypassing the kitchen entirely. The footage showed her walking straight into my office. The officers watched intently as my mother-in-law began pulling open my desk drawers. She dug through a stack of manila folders, reading labels on confidential client tax returns. She spent 8 minutes snooping through my professional documents before finally walking to the kitchen where the physical altercation occurred. I switched to the kitchen camera feed. The audio was crystal clear. The officers heard her demand that I cook and clean. They watched her lunge at me unprovoked and saw her nails dig into my arm as she snatched my phone. They watched me stand up, grab her, and walk her to the door. I paused the video. "As you can see, she was trespassing and attempting to access restricted corporate financial data before she assaulted me," I said, crossing my arms. "I only used the force necessary to remove an intruder." The stern officer sighed, shaking his head as he closed his notepad. He turned around and walked straight back out the front door. Brenda was waiting with a smug smile, expecting them to put me in handcuffs. Instead, the officer pointed a stern finger at her. You need to leave this property immediately," he ordered. Brenda gasped, her jaw dropping. "What are you talking about?" "Arrest her. She attacked me." The officer shook his head. "We saw the security footage, Brenda. We saw you digging through her confidential work files, and we saw you attack her first. If you do not get in your car and leave right now, I will arrest you for trespassing and assault. Furthermore, tampering with corporate financial records is a federal issue. Do you want me to call the FBI next?" Brenda turned completely pale. She looked at the officers, then glared at me standing in the doorway. She did not say another word. She grabbed her purse, stomped to her sedan, and sped out of the driveway. The police gave me a business card and left. The house was quiet again. But I knew the peace would not last. Derek was going to find out, and the real battle was about to begin. The front door burst open less than an hour later. It slammed shut with such force that the picture frames in the hallway rattled against the drywall. I was back at my kitchen island, drinking a cup of black coffee and finishing the corporate audit spreadsheet. Heavy footsteps stomped down the hall. Derek rounded the corner, his face purple with rage. He did not look like a husband checking on his wife after a police incident. He looked like an enraged toddler whose favorite toy had been taken away. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "My mother is at home having a panic attack. She said you grabbed her by the hair and threw her out into the cold like a stray dog. Are you completely out of your mind, Rachel?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. I looked at the man I had married 3 years ago. At 35, Derek was handsome in a superficial way, but right now his features were twisted into an ugly sneer. He stood over me, breathing heavily. Not once did his eyes drop to my right forearm where a thick gauze bandage covered the deep gashes his mother had clawed into my skin. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask what happened. He had already accepted Brenda's version of reality as the absolute gospel. She broke into my office. Derek, I said, my tone flat and even. She bypassed the kitchen, went straight into my workspace, and began reading confidential tax files. When I told her to leave, she attacked me and gouged my arm. I defended myself and removed an intruder from my property. Derek scoffed, throwing his hands in the air. An intruder? She is my mother. She has a key. She is family. She has every right to be in this house. You are acting like a psychotic, paranoid freak. She just wanted to make sure you were actually taking care of the house instead of hiding behind a computer screen all day. I set my coffee mug down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the granite. That computer screen pays the mortgage on this house, Derek. It pays for the luxury car sitting in the driveway that you drive to a consulting firm that never seems to turn a profit. I stood up, matching his height. And for the record, nobody has the right to access federal corporate tax documents without clearance. The police saw the footage. They threatened to arrest her. You should be thanking me that I did not press charges for assault. Derek slammed his fist on the kitchen counter. Do not you dare threaten to arrest my mother. You disrespected her. You disrespected me. I do not care about your stupid camera footage or your dramatic little scratches. You are my wife, and you owe my mother absolute respect. Put your coat on right now. We are driving over to her house. You are going to get down on your knees, and you are going to beg for her forgiveness until she accepts it. The sheer delusion in his demand hung in the air. Any remaining affection I had for this man instantly evaporated, leaving behind nothing but clinical observation. I looked at him not with anger but with the cold scrutiny I used to analyze fraudulent bank statements. I am not going anywhere, I replied. I am certainly not apologizing to a woman who assaulted me in my own home. You will do what I say, Derek yelled, stepping closer, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. I did not back up an inch. Let us break this down logically, Derek. You are 35 years old. You are legally married to me. Yet you operate as if Brenda is your primary partner and I am just the hired help. You gave her a key behind my back. You allow her to dictate how I should spend my time. When she commits a crime against me, your immediate reaction is to protect her feelings and demand my submission. You do not want a wife. You want a second mother you can sleep with and a financial sponsor to fund your lifestyle. His face went slack. The clinical precision of my words caught him off guard. He was used to women crying or yelling back. He was not used to being diagnosed like a parasitic financial liability. You are a monster, he whispered, pointing a trembling finger at me. You have no heart. My mother warned me about you. She said you were a cold, unfeeling machine who only cared about money. If you do not march out to that car right now and apologize to my mother, I am done. I will file for divorce so fast your head will spin. I will take half of this house and half of everything you own. You will be left with nothing. His threat echoed in the large kitchen. He puffed out his chest, expecting me to break down in tears. He expected me to beg him to stay. He thought the threat of divorce would bring me to my knees faster than his demand to apologize to Brenda. After all, society tells women that a failed marriage is their ultimate failure. But Derek forgot who he was married to. I was a forensic accountant. I did not fear audits. I initiated them. Divorce. I repeated, tasting the word. It did not taste bitter. It tasted like absolute freedom. Yes, divorce, he sneered, seeing my silence as hesitation. You either fix this with my mother right now or I am calling my lawyer in the morning. Your choice, Rachel. Bow down or lose everything. Lose everything, I quietly repeated, letting the threat hang. Derek leaned over the granite island. He slammed his hand flat against the countertop. Yes, everything, he sneered. I will take half of this house. I will take half of your retirement accounts and every investment portfolio you have been hoarding. You think because you work with numbers that you hold all the power. But the law is 50-50. If you do not march out to that car and apologize to my mother, I will bleed you dry in family court. I stood still watching the veins bulge in his neck. He actually believed throwing around legal terms would force me into submission. He forgot who he was dealing with. I audited corrupt millionaires who tried to hide corporate assets. His threats were nothing more than a child throwing a tantrum. I looked down at my left hand. Derek picked out the engagement ring and matching wedding band, but I was the one who paid off the credit card bill for them. In reality, everything in our life was an elaborate illusion, funded by my paycheck and maintained by his ego. I slowly reached over and grasped the rings. I slid them off my finger in one smooth motion. I casually tossed them onto the polished granite counter. They landed with a sharp metallic clatter echoing loudly in the tense kitchen silence. They spun rapidly before coming to a complete stop next to his clenched fist. Derek stared down at the rings. His jaw went slack. The color began to drain from his face as the brutal reality of my action registered. He expected me to drop to my knees and beg him to stay. He had not expected me to call his bluff. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice losing its aggressive edge. "I am saving you the trouble of making a threat you do not have the spine to follow through on," I said, dangerously calm. "We can call a divorce lawyer right now, Derek, but you should probably know how the legal process works before demanding half of my assets." He swallowed hard, taking a step back. "What are you talking about? When you officially file for divorce, the first thing that happens is financial discovery," I explained, leaning forward. "Both parties are required by law to open their books completely. Every bank account and hidden transaction is scrutinized under a microscope. Nothing stays hidden in family court, Derek. Nothing survives an audit." He crossed his arms defensively, but his eyes darted nervously around the room. "I have absolutely nothing to hide," he stammered. "My consulting business is completely legitimate and above board." "Is it?" I asked, tilting my head. "Because a legitimate business owner usually knows better than to commit blatant financial fraud against his own wife." "I do not know what you are talking about, you paranoid psycho," he shot back, but his voice trembled. I picked up my iPad, the exact same device I used to show the police the security footage of his mother. I unlocked the screen and opened a secured banking application. I turned the glowing screen around and pushed it firmly across the granite island until it stopped right in front of him. "If you really want a divorce, I will gladly give you one," I said without blinking. "But first, you are going to look me straight in the eye and explain exactly why $45,000 vanished from our joint high-yield savings account last Tuesday afternoon." Derek looked down at the digital screen. He did not speak. He did not even seem to breathe. "And before you try to tell me it was a business expense or a bad investment," I continued, my tone dropping to an absolute chill, "let me save you the desperate effort of lying. I already tracked the routing numbers. I know the money did not go to your struggling consulting firm. It was wire transferred directly into a highly suspicious offshore holding limited liability company registered in Delaware, a ghost company with zero public operating history." The heavy silence in the kitchen became absolute. The arrogant man who had stormed into my house demanding I kneel before his mother was entirely gone. Derek stared blankly at the digital ledger glowing on the iPad screen. The bright red minus sign next to the $45,000 transaction glared back at him. "Explain it right now, Derek," I commanded. He opened his mouth to speak, but no coherent words came out. The healthy color vanished from his cheeks, leaving his face pale gray. His hands began to shake so violently, he had to grab the solid edge of the counter just to steady his trembling legs. He was completely trapped. Derek did not answer the question. He could not. The digital ledger exposing the stolen $45,000 remained glaringly bright on the screen between us. Instead of confessing, he chose the coward's way out. He let go of the counter, snatched his car keys, and bolted for the garage door without looking back. The heavy door slammed shut, and seconds later, tires squealed out of the driveway. He was running away to formulate a lie, but the numbers never lied. I spent the rest of Sunday evening packing his clothes into garbage bags and leaving them in the guest room. The next morning, I woke up to prepare for work. When I picked up my phone, the screen was flooded with notifications. Text messages from distant relatives, missed calls from numbers I did not recognize, and an endless stream of social media alerts. I opened Facebook and immediately saw the source of the chaos. Vanessa. Derek's 31-year-old sister had spent her Sunday night orchestrating a digital witch hunt. Vanessa was the golden child of the family. She lived an aggressively curated lifestyle funded by money she did not earn. Her post was a masterclass in manipulative victimhood. It featured a close-up photo of Brenda's face looking pale and traumatized. The caption read in all capital letters, "Last night my sweet elderly mother was brutally attacked by my sister-in-law Rachel. She was thrown out of a house into the freezing cold unprovoked. We are pressing charges against this violent sociopath." It did not stop there. Vanessa took the smear campaign a step further. She cross-posted the fabricated story to LinkedIn, specifically targeting my professional network. She tagged the official corporate page of the elite financial accounting firm where I worked. She tagged the managing partners. She wrote a secondary caption demanding my immediate termination. She claimed that a woman who physically abused the elderly could not be trusted to handle millions of dollars in corporate assets. By the time I finished reading, the post had already garnered hundreds of shares and outrage from people who had no idea who I was. Vanessa thought public shaming would force me into submission. She thought threatening my career would make me beg for mercy. I did not panic. I took a screenshot of every single post, every comment, and every tag. I saved them to a secure cloud drive. I dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, covered the bandage on my right arm with a silk blouse, and drove downtown to the firm. The atmosphere in the office was noticeably shifted the moment I stepped off the elevator. Whispers stopped. Keyboards went silent. The receptionist, who usually greeted me with a warm smile, quickly looked down at her desk, pretending to sort through mail. The digital execution had already begun. I walked straight past my office toward the break room. Before I could pour a cup of coffee, my phone rang. It was the executive assistant for the managing partner. She informed me that my presence was required in the main glass conference room immediately. I walked into the boardroom carrying my iPad. The human resources director, a stern woman named Patricia, sat at the long mahogany table with her hands folded tight. Next to her was David, the senior managing partner of the firm. The massive television screen on the wall was turned on, displaying Vanessa's viral LinkedIn post. The bold letters accusing me of elder abuse hovered over our heads like a digital guillotine. "Close the door, Rachel." David said, his voice heavy with corporate concern. I shut the heavy glass door and took a seat opposite them, placing my iPad on the table. "Rachel, we have a very serious situation here." Patricia started leaning forward. "This post has been circulating since midnight. Clients are calling. The firm's reputation is being dragged into a domestic dispute. We cannot have an employee, especially a senior forensic accountant, associated with violent assault." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "You have been a stellar employee, Rachel. You saved this firm millions during the tech merger last year. But this is a public relations nightmare. The woman claiming to be your sister-in-law is demanding we terminate you. We need to know what is going on before we make a decision about your future." I looked at David, then at Patricia. I did not cry. I did not act defensive. I calmly tapped the screen of my iPad, waking it up. "I am glad we are having this meeting," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Because this post is not just a domestic dispute, it is an opportunity for me to solve a cyber harassment case that has been haunting this firm for over a year." David raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his leather chair. "A cyber harassment case," he echoed. "Rachel, what does your sister-in-law have to do with firm business?" I swiped the screen of my iPad and mirrored the display to the massive television on the wall, replacing Vanessa's viral post with a side-by-side comparison of server logs. "I am a forensic accountant, David. I track digital footprints just as meticulously as I track offshore bank accounts. When Vanessa launched this smear campaign last night, she made a critical error. She did not just post on social media. She actively tagged our corporate pages and sent a direct message to my official firm email address, demanding my termination. Patricia frowned, taking a note. And that matters because sending a direct message to our secure server logged her exact IP address and device fingerprint, I explained. I pointed to the left side of the screen. This is the origin data from Vanessa's late-night tirade. Now look at the right side of the screen. David leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he read the strings of numbers. His posture instantly stiffened. Are those the logs from the TechCom merger audit last October? He asked, his voice dropping an octave. Exactly, I said, nodding. Last year, during our most sensitive corporate audit, the firm received dozens of anonymous threatening emails. The sender attempted to derail the merger by threatening to leak fabricated financial data to the press. Our IT department managed to log the IP address and the specific device identifiers of the sender, but the trail went cold because the accounts were burner profiles. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on external security consultants trying to find the culprit. I tapped the screen, merging the two sets of data. They aligned perfectly, highlighting in bright green. Vanessa is not a criminal mastermind, I continued. She is a woman who thinks she is untouchable because she has never faced consequences. She used the exact same laptop on the exact same home network to send those anonymous corporate threats last year that she used to defame me last night. I do not know who paid her to try and sabotage the TechCom merger, but the digital evidence is absolute. The woman attacking my character today is the same cyberstalker who tried to extort this firm 12 months ago. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The dynamic shifted entirely. I was no longer an employee defending myself against a messy domestic dispute. I was the lead investigator who had handed them the head of a corporate saboteur on a silver platter. David stood up, pacing to the window overlooking the city skyline. The veins in his neck were visible. He was not just a managing partner. He was a man who fiercely protected his firm's reputation, and he had spent a year quietly seething over the anonymous threats that nearly cost him a $50 million account. He turned around, his face hardened into a mask of pure corporate ruthlessness. Patricia, he barked, get Gregory from legal on the line right now. I want every senior litigator in the boardroom in 5 minutes. Patricia scrambled for the phone. David looked at me, a fierce glint of approval in his eyes. Rachel, you are not fired. In fact, I am authorizing a bonus for uncovering this, but right now we are going to war. Nobody threatens this firm, and nobody publicly defames one of my top senior accountants without facing absolute ruin. Within 10 minutes, the boardroom was filled with 4 senior corporate attorneys. These were not family lawyers who argued over custody schedules. These were ruthless legal sharks who destroyed rival corporations for a living. I laid out the data, the matched IP addresses, and the screenshots of Vanessa's defamation campaign. The lead attorney, Gregory, reviewed the files with a cold, clinical precision. The TechCom extortion attempt alone carries federal weight, Gregory stated, tapping his luxury pen against the mahogany table. Add the coordinated cyber harassment and public defamation with the intent to cause professional and financial harm. We can bury her. We will bypass a standard cease and desist and go straight for the jugular. Draft the lawsuit, David commanded. I want a $1 million claim for defamation, corporate sabotage, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I want injunctions filed immediately. I want her personal and business assets frozen pending investigation. Serve her the papers today. Do not give her a single second to breathe or hide her money. I sat quietly watching the legal machinery of a multi-billion-dollar accounting firm turn its crosshairs directly onto my sister-in-law. Vanessa wanted to use the internet to ruin my life. She wanted to play a public game of victimhood to force me back into my miserable marriage. Instead, she had just poked a sleeping dragon. By tomorrow morning, she would owe $1 million to people who never lost in court. The meeting adjourned. I gathered my iPad and walked back to my quiet office. My job was entirely secure. But the dominoes were just beginning to fall, and Derek was about to find out exactly what happens when you cross a woman who knows how to destroy a life using nothing but numbers. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the legal courier arrived at Vanessa's doorstep. I knew the exact moment the heavy manila envelope was placed in her manicured hands because my personal phone began vibrating endlessly on my desk. Vanessa did not just receive a simple cease and desist letter demanding she delete her defamatory posts. She received a massive legal binder detailing the $1 million federal lawsuit, a temporary restraining order freezing her social media accounts, and a formal notice of an impending investigation by federal authorities for corporate extortion. Naturally, she did not call me to apologize or beg for forgiveness. She immediately called Derek, screaming hysterically that her perfect life was over. Exactly 30 minutes later, the receptionist on the ground floor lobby of my office building called my secure desk phone. Her voice was shaking with panic. She told me my husband was downstairs causing a massive scene, harassing the staff and demanding to be led up to the restricted executive floors. I did not panic. I simply told her to keep the building's security guards on standby and took the private glass elevator down to the main lobby. The silver doors slid open to reveal a spectacle of pure pathetic desperation. Derek was pacing violently across the polished marble floor of the reception area. His expensive silk tie was loosened, his hair was a complete mess, and his face was flushed a deep, angry red. Several high-profile corporate clients and junior accounting partners were standing nearby, quietly watching him make a complete fool of himself. When he finally saw me step out of the elevator, he charged forward like an enraged bull. The two large security guards immediately stepped in front of me, blocking his destructive path. Derek tried to physically push past their broad shoulders, but they held firm, crossing their arms. "Rachel, tell these useless rent-a-cops to back off," he screamed, his voice echoing wildly off the high glass ceilings of the lobby. I stood safely behind the guards, maintaining a perfectly blank professional expression. "Keep your voice down, Derek," I said calmly. "You are embarrassing yourself in front of my colleagues and clients." He scoffed, throwing his hands high in the air in an exaggerated display of victimhood. "I am embarrassing myself," he yelled, pacing back and forth. "You just had a ruthless corporate legal team serve my younger sister with a $1 million federal lawsuit. You are completely out of your mind, Rachel. She is your family. You do not sue your own family." I slowly crossed my arms, holding my ground. Family does not commit cyber extortion against a multi-billion-dollar accounting firm, Derek. She broke federal laws on our home network. My firm is handling the litigation now. It is completely out of my hands and above my pay grade. Derek slammed his open hand heavily against the marble security desk, startling the young receptionist into dropping her pen. "Drop the lawsuit right now," he demanded, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "Go upstairs, call your boss, and tell him it was all a giant misunderstanding. Fix this mess, Rachel." I shook my head slowly, letting a cold smile touch my lips. "No one is dropping anything," I replied. "She tried to publicly ruin my professional career to please your manipulative mother. Now she has to pay the ultimate price for her arrogance." Derek lost whatever fragile grip he had left on his sanity. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "You cannot do this to her," he screamed, the veins popping visibly in his forehead and neck. "Vanessa needs a clean criminal record to open her high-end spa in Boston. You are ruining her entire life over a stupid little Facebook post." I completely froze. The specific words echoed very loudly in my mind. A high-end spa in Boston. Vanessa had never worked a single day in her adult life. She had absolutely no personal savings, no business degree, and a terrible credit score. How on earth was she funding a commercial lease in one of the most expensive cities in the entire country? Derek realized his massive mistake the second the words left his mouth. His eyes went wide with sudden terror and he clamped his jaw shut, taking a step backward. I looked at the head security guard standing beside me. "Please escort my husband off the premises immediately," I instructed without taking my eyes off Derek. "If he returns, call the police and have him arrested for criminal trespassing." The guards grabbed Derek firmly by both arms and dragged him toward the revolving glass doors. He kicked and shouted, but I turned my back and walked straight to the elevator. I finally had the crucial missing puzzle piece. I stepped off the elevator on my floor and walked directly to my office. I closed the heavy oak door behind me and engaged the deadbolt. The quiet isolation of the room allowed my mind to process the magnitude of what Derek had just screamed in the lobby. A high-end spa in Boston. The words echoed in my head as I sat down at my desk and woke up my encrypted workstation. Vanessa was 31 years old and had not held a steady job since she graduated from college with a useless degree she barely earned. She spent her days shopping, posting aesthetic photos, and acting like a wealthy socialite. Her husband Jamal was a talented orthopedic surgeon, but even a doctor's salary could not comfortably fund commercial real estate in downtown Boston without years of saving. And Jamal was smart. He would never blindly hand his wife hundreds of thousands of dollars to open a high-risk vanity business. So where was the capital coming from? I opened my secure accounting software and brought up the digital ledger showing our joint high-yield savings account. The bright red minus sign next to the $45,000 transaction glared at me. 2 days ago, I traced that wire transfer to an anonymous limited liability company registered in Delaware. At the time, I assumed Derek was hiding assets in preparation for a divorce or paying off a massive hidden debt. But his absolute panic over Vanessa needing a clean record changed the entire trajectory of my investigation. I cracked my knuckles and began the digital excavation. I bypassed standard public records and accessed the specialized corporate tracking databases reserved for elite financial investigators. Delaware is notoriously secretive about corporate ownership, but no shell company is entirely invisible if you know how to follow the money. I tracked the routing number of the receiving bank account. I pulled the incorporation documents for the holding company and cross-referenced the registered agent against local tax filings. The registered agent was a generic law firm, but the secondary contact listed on the state tax permit was a personal email address. It was an email address I recognized immediately. It was the same email address Vanessa used to send me passive-aggressive holiday wish lists every December. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the screen. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. The anonymous Delaware company was not a phantom corporate entity. It was a shell account created specifically for Vanessa. Derek did not steal $45,000 from his own wife to fund his struggling consulting firm. He did not take it to pay off a secret gambling debt. He stole my hard-earned money to act as the primary angel investor for his spoiled younger sister. The sheer audacity of the betrayal left me momentarily breathless. In Derek's twisted family dynamic, Vanessa was the golden child who could do no wrong. Brenda had raised her son to believe that his ultimate duty in life was to provide for the women in his family. Not his wife, but his mother and his sister. I was simply the external revenue stream they had successfully tapped into. Derek had drained our joint savings to ensure Vanessa could sign a commercial lease for a luxury spa she had absolutely no business running. But as I stared at the financial data, a new, much darker question began to form in my analytical mind. $45,000 is a significant amount of money, but it is barely enough to cover a security deposit and first month of rent for premium commercial real estate in Boston. It certainly was not enough to fund the expensive renovations, buy the high-end salon equipment, or cover the initial payroll for a luxury spa. The math simply did not add up. Vanessa needed at least $250,000 to even get the doors open. If Derek had only stolen $45,000 from me, where did the rest of the capital come from? I pulled up Derek's personal credit report and his business accounts. I had always kept our primary finances separate, but I still had legal access to his tax portals because we filed jointly. I spent the next hour digging through his business ledgers. What I found made my blood run cold. Derek did not just have a struggling consulting firm. He had a dead one. His business had essentially collapsed 2 years ago. The income he had been reporting, the money he supposedly contributed to our household, was entirely fabricated. There was only one person left in their immediate circle who had access to capital. I picked up my cell phone. I needed to call Jamal. I held my cell phone in my hand, but I did not press the call button right away. Before I brought an innocent man into this financial war, I needed to map out the entire battlefield. I put the phone down and spent the next 3 hours dissecting every single ledger, bank statement, and tax return Derek had filed over the last 5 years. As a forensic accountant, I was trained to look for anomalies, but what I found in my own husband's records was not an anomaly. It was a complete systematic parasitic feeding tube. Derek's consulting firm had not just been struggling, it had been legally dead for 2 years. He had quietly filed for bankruptcy dissolution 24 months ago and never breathed a word of it to me. Every morning he would put on a tailored suit, kiss my cheek, and drive off to an office building he no longer rented. He spent his days sitting in coffee shops or at his mother's house playing the role of a successful businessman. But how was he contributing to our joint household bills if he had zero income? I traced the incoming deposits. The money he transferred into our joint checking account every month was not corporate revenue. It was drawn from a revolving door of high-interest personal loans and secret credit cards maxed out under his name. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. The most sickening discovery was where my money had been going. Because we kept our primary finances separate, I deposited my high six-figure salary into my personal accounts and transferred my portion of the household expenses into our joint account. I also trusted Derek to manage our joint savings. That was my fatal mistake. I watched the digital trail of my money flowing out of our savings and directly into the pockets of his family. Brenda did not have a retirement fund. Her lavish lifestyle was entirely subsidized by my paycheck. I found records of Derek paying off her platinum credit cards every single month. Those designer handbags she flaunted, the expensive dinners she bragged about to her friends, the luxury car lease she drove. All of it was paid for by the money I earned working 60-hour weeks. And then there was Vanessa. I uncovered dozens of smaller wire transfers made to Vanessa over the years, labeled as emergency loans or medical bills. Derek had been acting as a shadow ATM for his mother and sister, using my salary as the limitless cash supply. I sat back in my chair, feeling a chilling wave of clarity wash over me. The resentment they showed me was not just typical in law drama. It was the resentment of parasites toward their host. Brenda hated me because she knew subconsciously that she relied on my labor to survive. She demanded I cook and clean because she needed to assert dominance over the woman who actually held all the financial power. Derek allowed his mother to disrespect me because his entire fragile ego depended on maintaining the illusion that he was the provider. They were all complicit in a massive financial cover-up. But there was one person in their inner circle who was completely oblivious: Jamal. Vanessa's husband was a brilliant orthopedic surgeon. He was a good man, a hard-working African-American doctor who pulled grueling 80-hour shifts at the hospital. He rarely attended family dinners because he was always in the operating room or on call. Vanessa used his demanding schedule to her absolute advantage. She played the role of the devoted, wealthy doctor's wife while secretly bleeding my husband dry. But if Vanessa needed $250,000 to open a high-end spa in Boston, my stolen $45,000 was not going to be enough. She had to be stealing from Jamal, too. I knew exactly how financial parasites operated. They never stopped at just one victim. I picked up my cell phone again and dialed Jamal's personal number. It rang 4 times before he answered. His voice was gravelly and exhausted, likely fresh out of a long surgery. "Hello, Rachel," he answered, sounding mildly surprised. "Is everything okay? Vanessa told me there was some kind of argument with Brenda yesterday. Jamal, I need to see you," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Not at your house and definitely not around Vanessa. I need to meet you at the hospital cafeteria." He paused, clearly, taken aback by my serious tone. "Rachel, I just finished a 14-hour spinal fusion. I am exhausted. Can whatever this is wait until tomorrow?" "No, Jamal. It cannot wait," I replied, looking at the damning spreadsheets glowing on my monitors. "Because while you have been standing in an operating room saving lives, your wife has been actively destroying your financial future. And I have the documents to prove it. See you in 20 minutes. I parked my car in the visitor structure of Boston General Hospital and took the elevator up to the third-floor cafeteria. At this hour, the massive room was mostly empty, smelling faintly of industrial bleach and stale coffee. A few nurses in blue scrubs sat scattered at the tables looking exhausted. I spotted Jamal sitting alone in a corner booth near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. He was still wearing his surgical scrubs, a white coat thrown haphazardly over the back of his chair. He rubbed his eyes tiredly, holding a paper cup of black coffee. Jamal was a brilliant 34-year-old African-American surgeon who came from a hard-working middle-class family. He had earned everything he had through grueling study and endless hospital shifts. Vanessa had married him the second he finished his residency, securing herself the prestigious title of a doctor's wife. I walked over and slid into the vinyl booth across from him. He looked up, trying to muster a polite smile, but the dark circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. "Thank you for coming," I said, keeping my voice low. Jamal let out a heavy sigh, wrapping both hands around his coffee cup. "Rachel, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I just spent 14 hours repairing a shattered pelvis and a crushed femur. I am running on fumes and I really want to go home to my wife, but instead my phone has been blowing up all day. Vanessa called me in tears. She said your accounting firm filed a $1 million federal lawsuit against her this afternoon. She said you are trying to destroy her reputation over a family argument." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious but remaining respectful. "I know Brenda can be difficult. I know Derek caters to her too much. But suing Vanessa for $1 million? Do not you think this has gone way too far? Why are you attacking my wife, Rachel?" I looked at this honorable, exhausted man and felt a genuine pang of sympathy. He was a good person trapped in a snake pit, and he did not even realize the venom was already in his veins. He thought this was just petty domestic drama. He thought I was being vindictive over a verbal argument. "I am not attacking your wife, Jamal," I replied evenly. "I am foreclosing on a parasite, and unfortunately, you are the primary host." Jamal frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, pristine manila folder. I placed it flat on the sterile cafeteria table. I had spent the last few hours organizing the financial data into a comprehensive color-coded dossier. This was the same method I used when presenting evidence of corporate embezzlement to federal prosecutors. You do not argue with liars. You overwhelm them with undeniable mathematical proof. I pushed the heavy folder slowly across the table until it touched the edge of his coffee cup. "Open it," I instructed. Jamal looked at the folder, then up at me. "Rachel, I am not a financial expert. I cut bone and fix ligaments. I do not want to get involved in a legal dispute between you and Vanessa." "You are already involved, Jamal," I said, my voice tightening with urgency. "You have been involved since the day you married her. Open the folder." He sighed heavily, but reached out and flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. The first page was an executive summary I had typed up. Below it were stacks of bank statements, wire transfer logs, and tax filings. Each page was meticulously highlighted. "I want you to look at the colors," I explained, pointing to the first ledger. "Green highlights represent your surgical salary, the money you earn working 80 hours a week. Red highlights represent the money Derek stole from my personal savings account. And the yellow highlights represent the offshore holding company Vanessa secretly registered in Delaware last month." Jamal scanned the first page. His tired eyes slowly widened as he registered the sheer volume of numbers. "I see the red highlights," he said, his voice dropping. "There are transfers here for $45,000. You are saying Derek took this from you?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Derek stole $45,000 from our joint savings account to act as the seed money for Vanessa's new high-end spa." "But that is only the beginning." Jamal shook his head, completely bewildered. "That makes no sense, Rachel. Vanessa did not need seed money from Derek. She told me she funded the commercial lease for the spa using the profits from her cryptocurrency investments. She has been day trading for 2 years." I let out a short, humorless laugh. Jamal, your wife does not know the first thing about cryptocurrency. She has never day traded a single stock in her entire life. She does not even know how to balance a standard checking account. Turn to page 3. Jamal flipped the heavy pages, his fingers slightly trembling. He stared at the highlighted bank statements. There were no crypto exchanges listed. There were only wire transfers from Derek and massive unexplained cash withdrawals. You are a doctor, Jamal, I said, leaning in closer. You know how to read symptoms. Look at the data. If my $45,000 only covered the security deposit for her commercial lease, where did the rest of the $250,000 come from to build out the luxury spa? He stared at the numbers, the exhaustion completely vanishing from his face, replaced by a creeping dread. Where, he asked quietly. Turn to page 4, I replied. Jamal slowly turned the page. The document staring back at him was not a bank statement. It was a digital copy of a real estate contract. And the moment he read the bold heading at the top of the page, I watched the brilliant surgeon realize his entire life was a lie. Jamal traced his finger over the highlighted lines on page 4. The document was a digital copy of a real estate contract, specifically a commercial lease agreement for a premium storefront in downtown Boston. It was signed and notarized last month. The tenant listed was the offshore holding company Vanessa had registered in Delaware. But it was not the lease that made the brilliant surgeon stop breathing. It was the financial guarantee attached to the final page of the contract. Vanessa did not have the credit history or the personal assets to secure a multi-million-dollar commercial lease on her own. The property management company required a massive financial backer, a co-signer with pristine credit and substantial verifiable income. Jamal stared at the signature line. His own signature, looping and distinct, was stamped perfectly on the digital document. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Rachel, I never signed this, he whispered. I have never seen this document in my life. I know, Jamal, I replied softly, keeping my eyes locked on his. I ran a forensic analysis on the digital signature stamp. It was executed from the IP address at your house at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. According to the hospital schedule you sent me, you were in the middle of a complex spinal surgery at that exact time. Jamal slowly lowered the folder. The reality of the betrayal hit him with the physical force of a sledgehammer. The woman he loved, the woman he worked 80 hours a week to provide a comfortable life for, had not just lied to him about her phantom cryptocurrency investments. She had actively committed federal wire fraud and identity theft to secure a commercial lease he knew nothing about. She had tied his pristine medical license and his financial future to a massive high-risk vanity project without his consent. She forged my signature, he said, his voice cracking. She committed fraud. Yes, I confirmed. But unfortunately, the commercial lease is only the first part of the problem. A lease gives her the physical space, Jamal. It does not pay for the expensive contractors, the high-end salon equipment, or the initial payroll. My $45,000 barely covered the security deposit. She needed capital liquid cash to actually build the spa. Turn to page 5. Jamal's hands were visibly shaking now as he flipped the heavy cardstock page. He did not need to be a financial expert to understand the document staring back at him. It was a digital copy of a home equity line of credit, a HELOC approved and finalized 3 weeks ago. The loan amount was a staggering $150,000. And the collateral securing the massive loan was Jamal's own house. The beautiful 4-bedroom colonial he had spent years saving for the house he paid the mortgage on every single month had been leveraged without his knowledge. Once again, his digital signature was forged on the bottom line. She mortgaged my house. Jamal whispered the words, barely audible. She took out $150,000 of debt against my home while I was at the hospital saving lives. The silence in the cafeteria felt heavy and suffocating. I watched the honorable, hard-working man completely shatter. His exhaustion vanished, replaced by a profound and devastating grief. He had given Vanessa everything. He had bought her the luxury car, paid for her expensive vacations, and tolerated her constant need for designer clothes. He thought he was providing for a wife who loved him. Instead, he realized he was simply funding a parasite who saw him as an endless line of credit. "I have to go home," he said suddenly, standing up his chair, scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. "I have to go home and confront her right now. I am going to call the police. I am going to file for divorce." I stood up quickly, reaching across the table and placing my hand firmly on his arm. "No, Jamal," I said, my voice sharp and commanding. "Sit down." He glared at me, the grief in his eyes hardening into sudden violent anger. "Do not tell me to sit down, Rachel. My wife just stole $150,000 from me and committed identity theft. I am going to destroy her." I squeezed his arm, refusing to let him leave. "If you go home right now and confront her, you will lose everything I warned. Vanessa is manipulative and she is desperate. If she knows you have discovered the fraud, she will immediately drain whatever cash is left in those accounts. She will play the victim cry to her mother and hire a ruthless divorce attorney using your own money to fight you in court. She will claim you verbally authorized the HELOC. She will drag this out for years and you will be on the hook for the entire debt." Jamal froze, his chest heaving as he stared at me. "Then what am I supposed to do?" he demanded. "Let her get away with it. You are a surgeon, Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, clinical whisper. "When you find a tumor, you do not just start hacking away at the patient in a panic. You map it out, you isolate the blood supply, and then you excise it completely so it can never grow back. I am a forensic accountant. We do not get mad. We get everything. Sit down and let me show you exactly how we are going to destroy them legally." Jamal stared at me for a long, terrifying moment. Slowly, the anger in his eyes shifted. The frantic panic was replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. He pulled his chair out and sat back down at the table. I watched Jamal take a deep, steadying breath. His hands were no longer shaking. "Good," I said quietly. "Now look closely at the loan disbursement details." I flipped to page 6 of the dossier. When a bank approves a home equity line of credit for $150,000, they do not just hand over a briefcase full of cash. They deposit the funds into an authorized account. I pointed my pen at the routing numbers highlighted in yellow. "Notice where the bank wired the money, Jamal. It did not go into your joint checking account. It did not go into your personal savings. It went directly into the corporate checking account of the Delaware Holding Company." Jamal stared at the numbers, trying to process the magnitude of the financial trap. "But I am not listed on the incorporation documents for that company," he said, his voice completely hollow. "I do not own any part of that business." "Exactly," I replied, tapping the page. "Vanessa structured this with terrifying precision. By registering the business as a single-member limited liability company in Delaware, she ensured that she retains 100% ownership of the spa. You have zero equity, you have no voting rights and no claim to any future profits. But because the home equity loan is secured by your primary residence, you are individually responsible for 100% of the debt. If the spa fails and she defaults on the monthly payments, the bank will not repossess her salon chairs or her luxury facial equipment. They will foreclose on your house." Jamal rubbed his temples, closing his eyes tightly. "How did she even bypass the security protocols?" he asked, sounding defeated. "You cannot just apply for a massive mortgage loan without the primary homeowner verifying their identity. The bank requires a notary. They require multiple forms of identification." She exploited the digital infrastructure implemented during the pandemic. I explained, pulling up a copy of the digital audit trail. The bank used a remote online notary system. According to the system logs, the entire transaction was finalized via a video conference link. She submitted copies of your driver license and your passport, which she easily accessed at home. As for the video verification, she likely hired an impersonator, or used a fabricated power of attorney document to sign on your behalf. I have seen this specific type of marital fraud dozens of times in my line of work. Spouses use their intimate knowledge of security questions, passwords, and daily schedules to completely bypass institutional safeguards. Jamal leaned back against the vinyl booth, running a hand over his face. "She timed it perfectly," he whispered. She knew I was scheduled for a massive spinal fusion that Tuesday. She knew I would be scrubbed in for at least 12 hours without any access to my phone or my email. She executed the final signature while my hands were literally inside a patient. It was a calculated ambush, I said. She weaponized your dedication to your career against you. And right now, Vanessa thinks she has gotten away with the perfect crime. She believes that even if you eventually notice the new lien on the property, you will forgive her because you always forgive her. She expects you to just work more overtime to cover the monthly payments. I will never forgive this, Jamal said, his voice hardening into absolute steel. I work myself into the ground to provide for us, and she repays me by risking the roof over my head. I am calling the federal authorities. I am going to report the identity theft immediately. You will report it. I agreed, but timing is everything. If you report the fraud today, the bank will instantly freeze the accounts. Vanessa will panic, and she will run straight to Derek and Brenda. They will hire defense attorneys and try to spin a narrative that you verbally consented to the loan. We cannot allow them the opportunity to build a defense. We need to let them continue thinking they hold all the power. We need them to feel untouchable. Jamal looked at me, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. You have a larger plan, he stated. You are not just trying to get your $45,000 back. You want to dismantle all of them. My money is already insured against wire fraud, I replied coldly. I am going to make sure Derek and his mother experience the exact same level of financial destruction they tried to force onto us. I need you to play along for a few more weeks. Jamal nodded slowly. Tell me exactly what I need to do to completely ruin her. I am entirely ready to follow your lead on this mission, Rachel. I leaned across the table. Rule number 1 is absolute silence, I said. When you walk out of this hospital and go home tonight, you cannot show a single ounce of anger. You will walk through your front door, kiss your wife, and tell her you had a long, exhausting shift. You will ask her about her day, and you will listen to her lie to your face without flinching. Jamal swallowed hard, his jaw clenching. You are asking me to sleep next to a woman who just stole $150,000 from me and committed federal identity theft. I do not know if I can look at her without losing my temper, Rachel. You can, and you will. I insisted. Because if you show your hand now, she will panic. Vanessa will call Derek and Brenda. They will immediately empty the remaining cash from the holding company into an untraceable offshore crypto wallet. They will hire a defense attorney using your own money, and they will tie you up in family court for the next 5 years, claiming the home equity loan was a joint marital decision. We cannot give them the opportunity to build a defense. We have to blindside them. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. Okay. Absolute silence. What is rule number 2? Rule number 2 is gathering the ammunition. I continued tapping the closed folder on the table. First thing tomorrow morning, you are going to call a very specific type of divorce attorney. Not a mediator, not a family law counselor. You need a ruthless litigator who specializes in high-asset marital fraud. I have a list of 3 names I will email to you. You will retain one of them quietly. Jamal nodded, committing the instructions to memory. And the bank. Should I call the fraud department? Not yet, I warned. If you flag the loan, the bank will freeze the accounts and notify the account holder, which is Vanessa. Instead, you are going to go to your local branch in person. You will explain that you suspect your identity has been compromised, and you need to quietly place a hard lock on your personal credit profile so no new lines of credit can be opened. Then you will gather every single physical document you can find in your home office. Tax returns, bank statements, passports, and mail. Rent a secure storage unit and move the documents there. What about the spa, he asked. Should I confront the property management company in Boston? No, I said firmly. Let her keep building her vanity project. Let her sign contracts with contractors and purchase expensive equipment. Every dollar she spends right now is a dollar of debt she is accumulating under a fraudulent premise. When the authorities eventually seize the holding company accounts, she will be left holding the bag for dozens of breached vendor contracts. Let her dig her own grave. Jamal leaned back in the vinyl booth looking at me with a newfound respect. You really have thought of every single angle, Rachel. But what about you? What are you going to do about Derek and Brenda? They still think you are going to be fired and lose everything in a divorce. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I am going to give them exactly what they want. I am going to play the role of the terrified, submissive wife whose career is hanging by a thread. I am going to let Derek think he has all the leverage. Because when an arrogant man thinks he is winning, he gets sloppy. I am setting a trap involving the deed to our house. It is a trap so legally complex and financially devastating that by the time Derek realizes he has stepped in it, the jaws will have already snapped shut on his neck. Jamal looked at the thick financial dossier on the table. The exhaustion that had weighed him down earlier was completely gone. In its place was the cold, focused energy of a surgeon preparing to operate on a critical patient. He reached out and placed his hand firmly on the manila folder. They thought we were just easy targets, he said quietly. Two hardworking people they could bleed dry while they lived out their fantasies. They made a severe miscalculation, I replied. They mistook our dedication to our careers for stupidity. You are a highly skilled surgeon, Jamal. I am a forensic accountant. We spend our lives fixing complex problems and bringing the truth to light. We do not get mad. We get everything. I extended my right hand across the sterile cafeteria table. Jamal looked at my hand, then up into my eyes. He reached out and gripped my hand firmly. The handshake sealed our secret alliance. We were no longer just two betrayed spouses. We were an execution squad preparing to systematically dismantle the parasites who had infiltrated our lives. As we walked out of the hospital into the freezing Boston night, I knew the real war was about to begin. Over the next 4 weeks, I transformed into the exact woman Derek and his mother always wanted me to be. I became the quiet, submissive, and terrified wife. I stopped working late at the office. I started cooking dinner every single evening, making sure a hot meal was waiting on the granite kitchen island the moment Derek walked through the front door. When Brenda came over to inspect my housekeeping, I did not argue. I poured her tea and allowed her to criticize my domestic skills without uttering a single word of defiance. To them, my silence was a sign of absolute defeat. They truly believed the threat of divorce and the looming federal lawsuit against Vanessa had broken my spirit. Derek was intoxicated by this newfound power. He strutted around our house like a conquering king. He bought himself expensive watches and bragged loudly on the phone about his imaginary consulting deals. He thought he had successfully intimidated a senior forensic accountant into total submission. But he forgot that a predator is never more vulnerable than when it is feeding. While I was roasting chickens and folding his laundry, my mind was orchestrating his absolute financial ruin. During those 4 weeks, I dug even deeper into the rotting carcass of his finances. I had already proven he stole $45,000 to fund his sister's vanity project. But as I traced the rest of the capital flowing out of his dead business accounts, I realized Vanessa was only half of the equation. Derek was hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate. Massive unstructured withdrawals of $5,000 to $10,000 were being pulled from random ATMs across the city every weekend. No legitimate business operates entirely in cash withdrawals on a Sunday night. I used a specialized tracing software to map the geographic locations of the ATM withdrawals. They clustered tightly around a specific underground poker club and a well-known illegal sports betting hub in the south end of the city. I pulled his burner phone records, which I found hidden in his golf bag. The text messages were cryptic, but the pattern was undeniable. He was not talking to business clients. He was talking to bookies. Derek had a massive gambling addiction. He had been betting heavily on offshore sports syndicates and losing spectacularly. I calculated the exact total of his losses over the past 2 years. The number made me physically sick. He owed $200,000 to men who did not care about credit scores or collection agencies. They cared about broken bones and shattered kneecaps. This was the ultimate secret he was hiding. He was not just stealing from me to fund his mother's shopping habits or his sister's fake luxury life. He was bleeding Brenda dry and stealing my money to keep organized criminals from showing up at our front door. He was a desperate, terrified man playing a dangerous game of financial roulette with my life savings. Knowing his true vulnerability allowed me to perfectly calibrate my trap. I began quietly restructuring every single asset attached to my name. I opened new secure accounts that Derek had absolutely no legal access to and began systematically draining my personal wealth from any joint vulnerability. I moved my stock portfolios, my retirement funds, and my liquid savings behind a fortress of corporate trusts and legal firewalls. But I needed to leave him a piece of bait. Something so massive and tempting that his greed would blind him to the danger. I chose the house. Our beautiful $1.2 million suburban estate. Derek had always resented that my income qualified us for the mortgage. He desperately wanted the title of homeowner to stroke his fragile ego. 6 months prior, Derek had tricked me into signing a document under the guise of refinancing our mortgage. He claimed it would lower our interest rate. In reality, it was a quitclaim deed transferring the property title entirely into his and his mother's names. He thought he had cleverly stolen the house out from under me. He thought I was completely unaware of his legal maneuver. But what Derek did not know was that I had already weaponized the property against him. As a forensic accountant, I had the authority to red flag fraudulent businesses to the federal government. Weeks ago, I had submitted a comprehensive dossier on his fake consulting firm to the Criminal Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I triggered a massive federal audit of his illegal gambling funds and unpaid corporate taxes. The federal government silently attached a devastating tax lien to the property. By legally stealing the property title, they absorbed an $800,000 federal debt. The massive legal landmine was now fully planted and waiting to be triggered. Thanksgiving finally arrived, wrapped in the heavy illusion of perfect domestic bliss. I spent the entire morning in the kitchen, roasting a 20-pound turkey and baking pies, just like the obedient wife they believed they had successfully molded. The dining room table was set with my finest crystal and silver. The smell of cinnamon and roasted vegetables filled the air, masking the absolute toxicity of the people sitting in my chairs. Derek sat at the head of the table, carving the meat with an arrogant flourish. Brenda sat to his right, wearing a smug expression and a new designer necklace paid for by my stolen wages. Vanessa sat across from her, dripping in fake luxury, looking entirely unbothered by the $1 million federal lawsuit currently hanging over her head. Jamal sat beside his wife, eating quietly. Whenever our eyes briefly met across the table, his expression remained perfectly blank. He was playing his part flawlessly. The dinner conversation was agonizingly superficial. Derek bragged about a massive consulting contract he was supposedly closing next week. Vanessa complained about the minor delays in her spa renovations, blaming the contractors for being slow. I simply nodded my head and refilled their tall wine glasses, acting completely subdued. I waited patiently because I knew the ambush was coming. Predators never attack while they are eating. They wait until they are full and comfortable. The moment the last dessert plate was cleared, the atmosphere in the dining room instantly shifted. Derek stood up and walked over to the heavy oak double doors of the dining room, sliding them shut. He locked us inside. The click of the deadbolt echoed loudly. I remained seated at the end of the long table, resting my hands in my lap. Brenda wiped her mouth with a linen napkin and leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished wood. Her eyes gleamed with malicious triumph. "Rachel," she began, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness, "we have let you play this little game of rebellion for a month now. You have been behaving much better lately. You have been cooking and keeping the house in order like a proper wife should." I kept my face completely devoid of emotion. "Thank you, Brenda," I replied softly. Derek walked back to his chair, crossing his arms as he stood behind his mother. He looked down at me like a disappointed parent. "Good behavior is a start, Rachel," he lectured, "but it does not erase the massive disrespect you showed this family. You tried to ruin my sister over a simple social media post. You embarrassed my mother. You need to prove that you are truly committed to fixing this marriage." Vanessa smirked, taking a slow sip of her red wine. "You really went crazy, Rachel. Sending corporate lawyers after your own family." It was completely hysterical. Jamal shifted slightly in his chair but kept his gaze fixed firmly on his empty plate. Brenda raised her hand, silencing her daughter. She looked directly at me, her smile fading into a hard, demanding scowl. "Here is how this is going to work, Rachel. Tomorrow morning, you are going to call your managing partner and you are going to drop that ridiculous $1 million lawsuit against Vanessa. You will tell them it was all a terrible misunderstanding caused by your own emotional instability." I did not argue. I simply looked at her, waiting for the rest of the demands. Derek stepped forward, taking over the negotiation. "And to ensure you never try to pull a financial stunt like this again, you are going to sign over the management rights of your retirement accounts to me. I am the head of this household. I handle the investments. Your 401k and your stock portfolios need to be transferred into a joint trust that I control. You have proven you cannot handle the stress of managing money without having a mental breakdown." The sheer audacity of the demand was breathtaking. He owed $200,000 to violent bookies. He had completely bankrupted his own company. Yet he was standing in my dining room, demanding the keys to my entire financial future under the guise of being the responsible man of the house. He was desperate for liquid cash to save his kneecaps from the mob, and he thought I was broken enough to just hand it over. Finally, Brenda delivered the closing blow. "Once the lawsuit is dropped and the accounts are transferred, you will stand up, look me in the eye, and apologize for physically assaulting me. You will admit that you were hysterical and out of line. If you do all of that, we will graciously allow you to remain in this family." The trap was fully set. They had laid out their ridiculous terms. "I am not dropping the lawsuit against Vanessa," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly across the crystal glasses. "And I am certainly not handing you control of my retirement accounts, Derek. You cannot even manage a basic checking account without bankrupting it." Derek's face flushed a deep, furious purple. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the silverware rattle violently. "I warned you, Rachel," he snarled. "I told you what would happen if you did not comply with my demands." He reached inside the breast pocket of his expensive suit jacket. He pulled out a thick piece of paper folded neatly in thirds. With a dramatic, arrogant flourish, he tossed it down the length of the long mahogany table. It slid past the roasted turkey and came to a stop right next to my wineglass. "Take a good look at that," he sneered, crossing his arms over his chest, "because your absolute arrogance just cost you everything." I did not need to unfold the document to know what it was. I already knew every single word printed on those pages. But to maintain the illusion of their victory, I slowly picked it up and opened it. The bold black letters at the top of the page spelled out, "Quit claim deed." Vanessa laughed loudly, taking another sip of her red wine. "You really thought you were the smartest person in the room because you work with numbers," she mocked, her eyes shining with malice. "But you are completely clueless. You walk around acting like a corporate shark, but you just got played by your own husband." Derek leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table to command the room. "6 months ago, I told you we needed to refinance the mortgage to get a better interest rate." He explained, his voice dripping with condescending pride. "You were so busy with your precious corporate audits and working late that you barely even glanced at the paperwork the notary brought to the house. You just signed exactly where I told you to sign, like an obedient little idiot." I stared down at the document. My signature was clearly visible on the bottom line right next to the official notary stamp. "That was not a refinancing agreement." Rachel Derek continued, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "That was a legally binding quitclaim deed. You voluntarily transferred your entire ownership stake in this property. This $1.2 million estate no longer belongs to you. It is completely out of your hands." Brenda clapped her hands together, a sharp, ringing sound of absolute victory. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated venom. The house is entirely in my name and my son's name now, she announced proudly, pointing a finger at her chest. We are the sole legal owners. You have absolutely no equity and no right to be sitting at this table anymore. The sheer arrogance radiating from them was almost palpable. They honestly believed they had pulled off the crime of the century. They thought they had successfully outsmarted a senior financial investigator using a basic amateur real estate scam. Across the table, Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw clenching tight. His eyes darted toward me silently, asking if this was part of the plan. I gave him a microscopic nod, signaling him to remain perfectly still. I needed them to dig the hole as deep as possible. You brought this on yourself, Rachel, Brenda scolded, pushing her chair back and standing up to tower over the table. If you had just learned your place and respected your husband, we would have let you keep your little share of the house. But you had to be greedy. You had to attack my daughter and threaten our family. Derek walked around the table, stopping right behind my chair. I gave you a chance to fix this tonight. He whispered, his tone dark and threatening. I gave you a chance to drop the lawsuit and hand over your accounts. But since you want to be stubborn, you can leave with absolutely nothing. Brenda pointed her finger toward the front door. You heard my son, she commanded loudly. This is my house now, and I do not want you in it. Go upstairs, pack your bags, and get out of my house immediately. Vanessa pulled out her phone, holding it up with a vicious smirk. I should record this? She giggled. The great corporate accountant getting evicted from her own home on Thanksgiving. They waited for the tears. They waited for the desperate apologies and the frantic begging. But I did not give them a single ounce of satisfaction. I carefully folded the quitclaim deed and placed it back on the table. Then I did the one thing they absolutely did not expect. I smiled. It was not a small, hesitant smile, but a genuine, radiant expression of absolute relief. The room went dead silent. Brenda lowered her pointing finger, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. Derek shifted his weight, stepping back slightly, as if my smile was a physical weapon. They had prepared for a screaming match. They had prepared for a hysterical woman breaking down in her dining room. They had no idea how to handle a woman who looked at a stolen $1.2 million estate and simply smiled. Excuse me for just a moment, I said, my voice light and completely unbothered. I pushed my chair back and walked out of the dining room. I did not run. I climbed the grand wooden staircase, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood steps. I could hear their confused whispers echoing from the dining room below. Derek was muttering something to his mother, trying to reassure her that I was just in shock. But I was not in shock. I was executing the final step of a perfectly calculated evacuation plan. I walked into the master bedroom and opened my walk-in closet. I did not need to frantically pull clothes off hangers. Sitting neatly in the corner was a single, sleek black suitcase. I had packed it 3 weeks ago. It contained my most important personal documents, secure hard drives, jewelry, and enough tailored suits to last me a month. I left behind the expensive designer dresses, perfumes, and luxury watches Derek had bought me, using my stolen money. They were nothing but contaminated assets tied to a rapidly sinking ship. I grabbed the handle of the suitcase and rolled it out of the master bedroom. I did not take a final nostalgic look around. A house is only a home when it is filled with respect. This building was a prison, and I was finally walking out the front gates. The wheels of my suitcase hummed quietly as I descended the staircase. When I reached the ground floor, Vanessa was waiting for me in the foyer. She held her smartphone up high, the camera lens pointed directly at my face. She had a vicious, eager grin plastered across her face. Say goodbye to your beautiful house, Rachel, she taunted, her voice sickly sweet. I cannot wait to post this online. The great corporate accountant getting thrown out into the cold on Thanksgiving night. Give the camera a wave. I did not cover my face. I looked directly into the camera lens and gave her a calm, pleasant smile. Record every second of this, Vanessa, I advised, smoothly passing by her. You will want to remember exactly what tonight felt like. Derek was standing by the heavy oak front door, blocking the exit. He had his chest puffed out, trying to project the image of a powerful, dominant man. He looked at my single black suitcase and let out a harsh, mocking laugh. Jamal stood quietly in the hallway. Our eyes briefly locked, and I gave him a microscopic nod. "Is that it?" Derek asked, sneering. "One suitcase. You spent 5 years paying the mortgage on this place, and that is all you are walking away with. I told you what would happen, Rachel. You leave with nothing. You are walking out of here completely empty-handed." Brenda walked into the foyer, swirling her glass of red wine. "Oh, let her go, Derek," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "She is lucky we are letting her take her clothes. I am going to have decorators in here by Monday. That horrible blue paint in the guest room has to go." I stopped right in front of Derek. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing but hollow, arrogant greed. He thought he had won the ultimate prize. He thought he was an absolute genius who had outsmarted the system. "Move, Derek," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing command. He smirked, stepping aside. A blast of freezing winter wind whipped into the warm foyer, carrying tiny flakes of snow. I gripped the handle of my suitcase and stepped across the threshold. I did not look back. As the heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, I heard the distinct loud pop of a champagne bottle being uncorked inside the dining room. They were actually celebrating. They were toasting to their grand victory. I stood on the freezing porch, taking a deep breath. The cold did not bother me at all. I walked down the snow-covered driveway, pulling my suitcase behind me. The freezing winter wind bit into my cheeks as I dragged my suitcase down the long, snow-covered driveway. The wheels crunched loudly against the freshly fallen ice, but I barely noticed the cold. My heart was beating with a steady, rhythmic calmness. Behind me, the massive brick colonial house glowed warmly against the dark night sky. I could see the silhouettes of Derek and Brenda through the large dining room windows, raising their glasses in a victorious toast. They were celebrating their grand theft, completely oblivious to the fact that they were standing in the middle of a financial minefield. I reached the end of the driveway and turned right, walking down the quiet suburban street. The affluent neighborhood was completely silent. Most families were inside, sitting around their own Thanksgiving tables. 2 blocks down, a black SUV idled under a flickering street lamp, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. As I approached, the taillights flashed red. It was Jamal. We had coordinated this exact exit strategy weeks ago. I walked up to the passenger side of the vehicle. Before I could even reach for the handle, Jamal pushed the door open from the inside. A blast of warm, heated air hit my freezing face. I tossed my sleek black suitcase into the back seat and climbed into the front, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. The sudden quiet of the insulated cabin was a stark contrast to the howling wind outside. Jamal had both hands gripped tightly around the leather steering wheel. His knuckles were pale. He stared straight ahead at the snowy road, his jaw locked in a rigid line of suppressed anger. He had been forced to sit at that dining room table and watch his wife Vanessa laugh as I was illegally evicted. He had been forced to listen to Derek gloat about a forged real estate document. I knew how difficult it was for an honorable man like him to swallow his pride and play the role of the silent, compliant husband. I told Vanessa the hospital paged me for a post-operative emergency. He said, his voice tight with tension. I told her I had to leave immediately to check on a patient. She did not even care. She just waved me off and went right back to drinking her champagne. She was too busy celebrating your eviction to ask any questions. "You played your part perfectly, Jamal," I said, buckling my seatbelt. Reaching over, I turned the heater up a few notches. "Now put the car in drive and let us get out of this neighborhood." Jamal shifted the SUV into gear and pressed the accelerator. The heavy tires gripped the snowy asphalt as we pulled away from the curb. He drove in complete silence for the first few miles, navigating the dark, winding roads of the upscale suburb. The tension radiating from him was palpable. I could see his mind working, trying to process the sheer audacity of what had just happened in my dining room. He had trusted my plan, but actually witnessing Derek pull out a forged quitclaim deed had deeply shaken him. Finally, as we merged onto the main highway leading back toward the city of Boston, Jamal could not hold it in any longer. He gripped the steering wheel tighter and glanced over at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Rachel, I know you told me to trust your process, he began, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet cabin. I know you said you were setting a trap for them, but I just watched Derek pull out a legally binding real estate document. I saw your signature on that paper. I saw the notary stamp. They have the title to the property. I kept my eyes on the snowy road ahead, my expression completely unchanged. I know what you saw, Jamal. He shook his head, gripping the wheel even tighter. Then explain it to me, he demanded, clearly struggling to understand my absolute calm. Because from where I was sitting, it looked like your husband just committed massive property theft right in front of my face. That house is worth at least $1.2 million on the current market. You paid the mortgage on that property for 5 years with your own salary. Did you really just let them steal a $1.2 million house from you? I turned my head to look at the brilliant surgeon sitting next to me. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I let out a low, cold laugh that filled the warm cabin of the SUV. Jamal, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I did not lose a house tonight. I just handed them an $800,000 federal bomb. Jamal slammed on the brakes, pulling the SUV over to the side of the snowy road. He shifted the car into park and turned his entire body to face me. An $800,000 federal bomb, he repeated, his voice filled with absolute shock. What exactly did you do, Rachel? I adjusted the heating vent, letting the warm air blow across my freezing hands. I am a senior forensic accountant, Jamal. My entire career is built on tracking financial crimes and dismantling corporate fraud. When I discovered that Derek had bankrupted his consulting firm and was funding his life through illegal sports betting, I did not just sit back and cry. I audited my own husband. Jamal listened intently, the soft glow of the digital dashboard illuminating his face. I explained how Derek had been severely underreporting his income for years, while simultaneously claiming massive fraudulent business expenses to offset his taxes. He was writing off luxury vacations, designer clothes, and expensive dinners as corporate overhead for a company that legally did not exist anymore. Worse, the money he was funneling to the illegal gambling syndicate crossed state lines, making it a federal issue. He owed the government a staggering amount of unpaid taxes, fines, and severe penalties. 5 months ago, I compiled a 500-page dossier detailing every single fraudulent transaction, offshore transfer, and illegal bet Derek had made. I included bank routing numbers, IP addresses, and digital signatures. I submitted that flawless dossier directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I invoked my professional credentials as a certified fraud examiner to ensure the file bypassed the standard civilian review queue and landed directly on the desk of a senior federal agent. Jamal stared at me, leaning back against his leather seat. You called the federal government on your own husband, he asked, his tone a mixture of awe and terror. I did more than call them, I replied smoothly. I handed them a watertight criminal case. The federal government moves slowly, but when they finally strike, they do not miss. 4 weeks ago, the IRS concluded their preliminary secret audit. They assessed Derek's total tax liability, penalties, and compound interest at exactly $812,000. Because he has absolutely no liquid cash left to seize, they moved to secure that massive debt immediately. They filed a federal tax lien against his most valuable tangible asset, the house. Jamal realized, his eyes widening as the pieces finally snapped together in his brilliant mind. They attached the federal lien to the house. Exactly. I smiled, leaning my head back against the headrest. A federal tax lien attaches directly to the property itself, regardless of who holds the mortgage. Derek thought he was a criminal mastermind when he tricked me into signing that quitclaim deed 6 months ago. He thought he was stripping me of my hard-earned equity and stealing my real estate investment. But what he actually did was legally restructure the ownership right before the federal hammer fell. I turned to look Jamal straight in the eyes. In real estate law, when you transfer a title with a quitclaim deed, the new owners take the property exactly as it is. They accept all the burdens, all the liabilities, and all the existing or pending federal encumbrances. By removing my name from the deed, Derek effectively severed my legal liability to the physical property. He shielded me from the impending foreclosure. Jamal let out a sudden breathless laugh, shaking his head in pure disbelief. Brenda co-signed the deed. She bragged about it tonight. She put her name on the house just to prove a point to you. She wanted to be the lady of the manor, I said, my voice ice cold. She demanded to be the primary woman in Derek's life. Now she is the proud co-owner of a massive federal tax debt. By voluntarily signing that deed, Brenda legally absorbed the liability. The IRS does not negotiate with tax evaders, and they certainly do not care about her petty family drama. They are going to foreclose on that property and seize every single asset attached to Brenda's social security number. They will empty her retirement accounts and freeze her credit. They popped champagne tonight because they thought they won a luxury mansion. I continued looking out the window at the falling snow. But they are sleeping in a house that the federal government already owns. Tomorrow morning, they are going to wake up completely bankrupt and facing aggressive federal criminal prosecution. They locked themselves inside a burning building. Now Jamal put this car in drive. It is time to initiate phase 2 and legally take care of your manipulative wife. Jamal shifted the SUV into drive. The tires gripped the snow as we pulled away from the quiet suburban street, leaving the stolen house far behind us. He dropped me off at the luxury extended stay hotel I had booked weeks in advance. As I grabbed my sleek black suitcase from the back seat, Jamal looked at me with absolute determination. "Thank you, Rachel," he said quietly. "I will see you on the other side of this." The very next morning, Jamal did not go to the hospital. He called in his remaining vacation days and went straight to work dismantling Vanessa's meticulously crafted illusion. His first stop was the towering glass office building of the high-asset divorce attorney I had recommended. He sat across from the senior litigator and handed over the color-coded financial dossier. The attorney reviewed the forged loan documents and the offshore shell company records. He immediately drafted a ruthless divorce petition citing extreme financial abuse and marital fraud. The paperwork requested a complete disproportionate division of whatever assets remained and an emergency injunction to sever all financial ties. But Jamal did not stop at family court. With the divorce petition officially filed, he took the original copies of the forged home equity line of credit directly to the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He sat down with a special agent in the cybercrimes division and laid out exactly how Vanessa had bypassed bank security protocols while he was performing spinal surgery. The digital audit trails the remote notary logs, and the unauthorized wire transfers provided undeniable proof of identity theft and federal wire fraud. Because the stolen funds were transferred across state lines into a Delaware shell corporation, it triggered an immediate federal jurisdiction. His final stop was the main branch of his primary bank. Presenting his identification and the initial police report, he placed a hard freeze on his personal credit profile. He revoked Vanessa's access to his primary checking accounts and formally flagged the $150,000 home equity loan as a fraudulent transaction. The bank security team immediately locked down every single account associated with Vanessa's name and the Delaware holding company. Within 4 hours, Jamal had completely cut the financial supply line. Vanessa was entirely oblivious to the absolute destruction of her empire. The following morning, she woke up late, drank an expensive matcha latte, and drove her leased luxury car into downtown Boston. She was scheduled to meet with an elite interior design team at her commercial spa location to finalize the installation of Italian marble countertops. She strutted into the massive empty storefront wearing designer sunglasses. The lead contractor approached her holding a tablet. "Good morning, ma'am," he said politely. "We are ready to begin the installation, but the initial wire transfer you promised yesterday for the marble deposit never cleared. We need payment before my crew unloads the trucks." Vanessa scoffed, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "It must be a banking error," she said, pulling her corporate credit card from her purse. Just run this card for the $40,000 deposit. It is tied to my business account. The contractor plugged his card reader into his tablet and swiped the card. A bright red error message flashed across the screen. Declined. He tried again. Declined. Vanessa frowned, snatching the card back. That is impossible, she snapped. Run it manually. I have hundreds of thousands of dollars in that account. Before the contractor could punch in the numbers, the heavy glass doors of the spa swung open. Two men wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow across the back walked into the commercial space. They were accompanied by a bank fraud investigator holding a thick stack of legal documents. Vanessa froze. Her designer sunglasses slipped down the bridge of her nose. Are you the registered owner of the Delaware Holding Company, currently leasing this property? The lead agent asked, his voice echoing in the empty room. Yes, she stammered, her face turning a sickly pale gray. What is this about? Mom, we are executing a federal seizure warrant on this property, he said, handing her the documents. Your corporate bank accounts have been permanently frozen, pending a federal indictment for wire fraud and identity theft. Everything inside this building purchased with fraudulent funds is now property of the United States government. The contractor immediately signaled his crew to pack up their tools. Vanessa dropped her purse onto the dusty concrete floor. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking violently as she frantically dialed Jamal's number. It went straight to a cold automated voicemail. The golden child of the family had just hit a solid brick wall. She was completely ruined forever now. While Vanessa was discovering the horrifying reality of federal asset seizure inside her empty spa, Derek and Brenda were completely oblivious to the impending collapse of their own stolen kingdom. The massive brick colonial house that I had paid for had transformed into their personal playground. They were living in a pure state of arrogant delusion. They genuinely believed that by throwing me out into the snow on Thanksgiving night, they had successfully secured their financial future. Derek thought he had completely outsmarted a senior forensic accountant, while Brenda finally had the massive house she always felt she deserved. They did not waste a single day. Brenda immediately hired an expensive team of interior decorators to rip out the pale blue paint in my former guest room, replacing it with gaudy gold wallpaper. She threw lavish dinner parties for her country club friends, serving expensive champagne and showing off the marble countertops. She proudly introduced Derek to her wealthy social circle as a highly successful consultant who had just acquired a $1 million estate. She completely erased my existence from the property, claiming she and her son had always owned the house. Derek was equally intoxicated by his illusion of total victory. He used the newly acquired house title to secure a minor line of credit from a shady local lender, completely unaware of the massive $800,000 federal tax lien quietly sitting underneath his new debt. He used the small burst of borrowed cash to buy himself a ridiculously expensive sports car, leasing it under his name. He drove around the affluent suburb with the windows down, blasting loud music, trying to project the image of a man who had finally made it. But their celebration was not enough. They needed to actively rub their perceived victory in my face. They wanted to ensure I felt entirely defeated. Starting the Monday after Thanksgiving, my personal cell phone became a constant target for their malicious arrogance. The first voicemail arrived while I was sitting in my temporary luxury hotel suite reviewing financial documents. It was Brenda. Her voice was thick with condescending sweetness and the unmistakable slur of expensive wine. Rachel, darling, she slurred slightly. I just wanted to call and let you know that the new velvet curtains for the master bedroom arrived today. They look absolutely stunning. Much better than those cheap linen ones you picked out. Oh, and Derek had your remaining junk in the basement thrown out with the trash this morning. I hope you are enjoying whatever tiny little apartment you managed to rent. Do not ever try to contact my son again. I did not delete the message. I calmly pressed save and uploaded the audio file directly into my encrypted secure cloud server. The next day, Derek called. He did not bother with pleasantries. He was riding the high of his new leased sports car and wanted to flex his power. Hey, Rachel, he said, his voice loud and aggressively arrogant over the roar of the car engine. Just calling to remind you that I am filing the official divorce paperwork next week. I am going to make sure my lawyer goes after your retirement accounts just like I promised. You should have just dropped the lawsuit against Vanessa when you had the chance. Now you are homeless and you are going to be completely broke. Have fun starting over from scratch, loser. Again, I did not react. I simply saved the audio file, placing it meticulously into the growing digital evidence folder labeled Intent to Defraud. This pattern continued for 2 solid weeks. They called to mock me. They called to brag about the money they were spending. They called to remind me that they had successfully stolen the house, and that I was entirely powerless to stop them. They were so blinded by their greed and their intense hatred for me that they completely forgot how the legal system actually works. Every single voicemail they left was a massive, unforced error. In family court, intent is everything. Derek was legally documenting his malicious intent to impoverish his spouse. He was admitting on a recorded line that his primary goal was financial ruin. Brenda was providing audio proof that she knowingly participated in an illegal real estate transfer to deprive me of my marital assets. They were literally handing me the nails for their own coffins. I sat in my quiet hotel room listening to their arrogant voices, compiling a chronological timeline of their harassment. I paired the audio files with the financial documents proving Derek's hidden gambling debts and his fraudulent consulting firm. My legal case was no longer just about recovering stolen money. It was an ironclad, impenetrable fortress of evidence proving a coordinated family conspiracy to commit financial fraud and marital extortion. Let them drink their expensive champagne. Let them redecorate a house they will never actually own. I had all the evidence I needed. The trap was fully loaded, and it was finally time to trigger the explosion. The explosion was scheduled for a Tuesday morning on the 42nd floor of a high-rise legal building in downtown Boston. The formal mediation room was designed to intimidate with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, offering a sweeping view of the city skyline and a massive polished mahogany table anchoring the center. I sat on one side of the table with my corporate attorney quietly arranging my pristine color-coded folders. Directly across from me sat the architects of my supposed destruction. Derek, Brenda, and Vanessa were lined up like smug royalty. They were practically vibrating with unearned confidence. Vanessa was wearing a brand new designer coat, completely unaware that her commercial spa had been raided by federal agents just 48 hours prior. Brenda sat with her chin held high, looking around the expensive room as if she already owned it. Derek slouched in his leather chair wearing a custom suit he could not afford, whispering jokes to his cheap strip mall lawyer. They genuinely thought this mediation was a simple formality. They thought they were here to collect their final payout. Derek's lawyer cleared his throat and slid a thin, poorly drafted settlement proposal across the smooth wood. "My client is willing to be generous," he began, his voice lacking any real authority. "Since your client Rachel abandoned the marital home on Thanksgiving night, we are filing for divorce based on irreconcilable differences and marital abandonment. We are demanding permanent spousal support in the amount of $10,000 a month. Furthermore, we require the immediate transfer of 50% of Rachel's retirement portfolios and full payment of all our legal fees. Since my client already retains sole ownership of the primary residence, we consider this a highly favorable compromise." Derek smirked, leaning forward. "Just sign the papers, Rachel," he said, his tone dripping with fake pity. "You left the house. You gave up. If you fight this, I will drag you through family court for years and bleed you dry." Brenda let out a soft, condescending laugh. "It really is for the best, dear," she chimed in, adjusting her stolen necklace. "You never really belonged in our family anyway. Pay my son what you owe him, and you can finally move on with your sad little life." Vanessa rolled her eyes, checking her perfectly manicured nails. "Seriously? Rachel, just sign it," she added. "I have an interior designer waiting for me at the spa in an hour, and I do not want to be late. Some of us actually have successful businesses to run." I looked at Vanessa, then down at my watch. It was exactly 10 o'clock. I did not touch the settlement proposal. I simply leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. You are not going to a spa today, Vanessa. I said, my voice perfectly level. In fact, you are not going anywhere, not. Before Vanessa could snap back, the heavy glass door of the mediation room swung open. The arrogant smirks vanished from their faces, instantly replaced by profound confusion. Jamal stepped into the room. He was wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal suit. His face was a mask of absolute stone. The honorable, exhausted surgeon they had constantly taken for granted was completely gone. In his place was a man who had excised a tumor from his life. Walking right beside him was one of the most feared high-asset litigators in the state of Massachusetts. Vanessa blinked rapidly, her designer coat suddenly looking entirely out of place. "Jamal, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice faltering. "You are supposed to be at the hospital." Jamal did not answer her. He walked straight to our side of the table and stood towering over the seated parasites. His attorney stepped forward, unbuckling a thick leather briefcase. Without a single word, the attorney pulled out a heavy stack of legal documents and dropped them directly in front of Vanessa. The loud slap of paper hitting mahogany echoed through the silent room. "What is this?" Derek demanded, sitting up straight, trying to regain control. "This is a private mediation. You need to leave right now." Jamal kept his eyes locked solely on his wife. "That is an emergency divorce petition, Vanessa," he stated, his voice carrying the cold authority of a medical diagnosis. "It cites extreme financial abuse and marital fraud. My attorney filed it yesterday morning." Vanessa let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, shaking her head. "Divorce," she repeated, looking at her mother for support. "Jamal, stop making a scene. We can talk about whatever you are upset about at home." "We do not have a home," Jamal corrected sharply. "Because you took out a $150,000 home equity line of credit against it while I was performing spinal surgery. You forged my signature. You committed identity theft." Brenda gasped, clutching her chest. Derek turned pale, looking frantically between Jamal and his sister. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. "But that is not the worst part," Jamal continued, pointing to the second document in the stack. "That is a copy of a federal indictment from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I reported your wire fraud on Friday. The bank locked all of your accounts. Federal agents seized your commercial spa 2 days ago. Every piece of equipment you bought, every dollar you stole is gone. You are completely broke, Vanessa, and you are going to federal prison." Vanessa stared at the bold FBI logo printed on the top sheet of paper. Her hands began to shake so violently she had to grip the edge of the table. The golden child was entirely broken. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vanessa dropped the federal indictment onto the polished mahogany table as if it were on fire. She buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, ragged sob that echoed off the glass walls of the mediation room. Jamal did not comfort her. He did not even flinch. He simply turned his back on the woman who had used him as a human credit card and walked over to stand firmly behind my chair. The battle lines were officially drawn, and the parasitic family was rapidly losing ground. Derek, however, refused to accept defeat. He had spent his entire life being coddled by his mother and shielded from the consequences of his actions. He genuinely believed he could still bully his way out of this trap. He stood up aggressively, pushing his leather chair back so hard it slammed against the wall behind him. He let out a loud, nervous laugh that sounded hollow and entirely desperate. He violently adjusted the lapels of his expensive custom suit, trying to project the image of a dominant businessman. "Okay, fine," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Jamal. "You caught Vanessa making a stupid financial mistake. That is between you two. That has absolutely nothing to do with my divorce settlement." He turned his arrogant glare back to me, placing both hands flat on the table and leaning forward to assert his dominance. "You think you are pulling off some massive power move right now, Rachel. You think bringing your little brother-in-law here scares me? It does not mean a thing to me. Vanessa might be completely broke, but Mom and I are not. We own a $1.2 million estate outright. We have the leverage here, Rachel. You are the one who is homeless. Brenda immediately rallied behind her son's false bravado. She sat up straighter, clutching her stolen designer purse tightly against her chest. Exactly, she snapped, glaring at me with pure hatred. My son and I hold the legal deed to that massive property. We are wealthy property owners now. You have absolutely no equity and no legal standing to threaten us. You are living out of a suitcase in a cheap hotel room. Do not act like you have the upper hand when you have nothing left to your name. We are still walking away with your retirement accounts today. Their cheap strip mall attorney leaned over and whispered frantically into Derek's ear, clearly realizing the dynamic in the room was entirely out of his depth. He could read the situation better than his arrogant clients. But Derek swatted the lawyer away, refusing to listen to reason or legal caution. He stood there, puffing his chest out, waiting for me to surrender to his supposed wealth and power. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice or try to explain the complex intricacies of federal tax law. I simply reached into my pristine color-coded folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, placing it face down on the polished table. Then I casually lifted my left wrist and checked my watch. It was exactly 10:15 in the morning, right on schedule for the grand finale. Derek frowned, his false confidence faltering slightly as he watched me check the time so calmly. "What are you looking at?" he demanded, his voice cracking just a fraction. "Stop playing stupid games and sign the settlement proposal right now." I looked up from my watch and met his angry stare head on. "I am not playing games, Derek," I replied, my voice echoing coldly across the large, quiet mediation room. "I am just waiting for the final guest to arrive to our little meeting." Right on cue, 3 sharp, heavy knocks hammered against the thick glass door of the boardroom. The sound was authoritative and commanding, demanding immediate attention from everyone inside. Derek jumped, slightly startled by the sudden harsh noise. Brenda turned her head toward the door, a deep, confused frown wrinkling her forehead. I gave a slight, silent nod to my high-asset corporate attorney. He stood up, walked over to the heavy glass door and pulled it wide open. The air in the room instantly shifted. 2 tall, broad-shouldered men walked confidently into the mediation room. They were not corporate lawyers or family court mediators. They were wearing dark tactical windbreakers with the bright yellow letters IRSCID printed boldly across the chest. Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. They both had federal badges clipped to their belts, right next to their holstered sidearms. The cheap strip mall attorney representing Derek took one look at the armed federal agents and closed his briefcase, sliding his chair back from the table. "I withdraw as counsel," the lawyer squeaked, standing up so fast his chair wobbled precariously on the carpet. He did not ask any questions. He did not try to defend his arrogant client. "You do not argue with the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service." He grabbed his heavy wool coat and bolted out of the glass boardroom, leaving Derek completely exposed and entirely alone. "Where are you going?" Derek yelled, his voice cracking with sudden frantic panic. He looked back at the 2 federal agents who were now taking tactical positions on either side of the heavy mahogany table. "What is this, Rachel? What kind of sick stunt are you pulling right now?" I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the physical culmination of 5 months of meticulous forensic tracking. It was a massive 500-page bound dossier. I placed both hands on the thick, heavy spine and shoved it hard across the polished wood. It slid rapidly, stopping right in front of Derek with a loud, heavy thud that made him flinch. "I am not pulling a stunt, Derek," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. "I am executing a foreclosure." Derek stared down at the massive binder. The front cover boldly displayed the official seal of the Internal Revenue Service, alongside his full legal name and the name of his bankrupt consulting firm. His arrogant facade began to crumble rapidly, replaced by the creeping terror of a man realizing he was entirely trapped in a cage of his own making. "You spent the last month bragging about stealing my house." I continued, resting my elbows on the table and lacing my fingers together. You threw me out into the freezing snow and thought you were a real estate genius. But you need to read the fine print in that dossier, Derek. You do not own a mansion. You own an $800,000 federal tax debt. Derek's mouth dropped open. No, he whispered, shaking his head frantically. The deed is in my name. Mom and I own the equity. We own the property outright. You own the liability, I corrected sharply. You owed $200,000 to an illegal sports betting syndicate. You funneled stolen money across state lines to pay off violent bookies. You committed federal tax evasion for 5 consecutive years. I audited you, Derek. I handed every single one of your financial crimes to the federal government months ago. They placed a massive tax lien on the property right before you filed that fraudulent quitclaim deed. I checked my watch one final time, letting a cold, genuine smile touch my lips. The federal court approved the seizure yesterday. The house was officially foreclosed on at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. Federal marshals are currently at the property changing the locks and seizing your leased sports car. You are officially homeless. The complete and absolute destruction of his ego happened in real time. Derek slumped back in his leather chair, his eyes darting wildly around the room, looking for an exit that simply did not exist. But the devastation was not finished. I turned my attention to the woman sitting next to him. Brenda was staring at me, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated horror. She was clutching her stolen designer purse so tightly her knuckles were completely white. "And you, Brenda?" I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a surgical scalpel. "You were so desperate to be the lady of the house. You proudly signed that quitclaim deed on Thanksgiving just to prove you had defeated me. Do you understand how federal tax liens actually work?" Brenda swallowed hard, her breathing becoming incredibly shallow and erratic. "By legally putting your name on that deed, you voluntarily accepted joint liability for the encumbrances attached to the property," I explained, leaning forward so she could hear every single word clearly. "You absorbed your son's $800,000 tax debt. The federal government does not care about your country club status. They are coming for your retirement accounts. They are seizing your bank accounts. You are going to spend the rest of your miserable life paying off a house you do not even own." The reality of her complete financial ruin hit Brenda with the force of a speeding freight train. She let out a high-pitched, wheezing gasp. Her hands flew up to her chest, clutching her designer necklace as if it could save her. "My money," she choked out, her eyes rolling back slightly in her head. "My beautiful house." Brenda tipped sideways, sliding right out of her expensive leather chair and collapsing heavily onto the carpeted floor. She began hyperventilating wildly, gasping for air in a full-blown panic attack. Vanessa, who was already destroyed by her own FBI indictment, sat frozen in her chair, completely paralyzed and unable to help her mother. Derek looked down at his mother writhing on the floor, and then looked back at the massive federal dossier sitting in front of him. The sheer humiliation of being completely outsmarted, the terrifying reality of federal prison, and the absolute loss of his stolen empire finally snapped whatever fragile sanity he had left. With a primal scream of blind, unadulterated rage, Derek vaulted out of his chair. He lunged across the wide mahogany table, his hands outstretched, aiming directly for my throat. I did not even blink. I did not move an inch. Before Derek could even cross the center of the table, the 2 armed IRS agents moved with terrifying speed. The lead agent grabbed Derek by the back of his expensive suit jacket and slammed him brutally face first into the polished mahogany. The impact rattled the glass walls of the boardroom. The second agent immediately twisted Derek's arms forcefully behind his back. The cold, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly over Brenda's hyperventilating gasps. "Derek, you are under federal arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering," the agent stated, pressing his knee firmly into Derek's spine to keep him pinned to the table. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." I stood up slowly, smoothing out the front of my tailored suit. I looked down at the man I used to call my husband. his face pressed painfully against the wood, his arrogant empire reduced to absolute rubble. Across the table, Jamal stood tall, a silent sentinel, witnessing the total excision of the parasites who had ruined our lives. We had executed the perfect financial surgery. It was an absolute flawless checkmate. The heavy boardroom doors closed on my past life that Tuesday morning, sealing the fate of the people who tried to destroy me. 6 months have passed since that flawless checkmate. The federal justice system moves with terrifying efficiency when handed a 500-page, fully documented forensic roadmap. Derek did not get to charm his way out of a courtroom. Faced with undeniable wire fraud and tax evasion charges, he accepted a swift plea deal. He is currently serving a mandatory 5-year sentence in a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. There are no expensive custom suits in his new wardrobe. He wears a standard-issue khaki jumpsuit. He spends his days working in the prison laundry room, earning a few cents an hour, which is a far cry from the arrogant consultant who once demanded control over my retirement accounts. The illegal sports betting syndicate he owed money to was dismantled partly due to the digital trail he left behind, making him extremely unpopular among the other inmates. His fragile ego was completely shattered the moment the heavy iron bars slid shut. Brenda experienced a much different but equally devastating prison. When the IRS finalized the foreclosure on the massive brick colonial she voluntarily attached her name to, they did not stop at seizing the property. They liquidated her entire life. They drained her bank accounts, seized her stolen designer jewelry, and auctioned off her luxury car. Because she signed the fraudulent quitclaim deed, she remains jointly responsible for the massive remaining balance of the tax debt. Today, Brenda lives in a dilapidated, rusted, single-wide trailer in a forgotten park on the outskirts of the city. The federal government mercilessly garnishes her meager Social Security checks before she even sees the money. Her wealthy country club friends blocked her phone number the minute the scandal hit the local papers. She spends her evenings sitting on a cheap plastic lawn chair, staring at a chain-link fence with absolutely nothing left to brag about. Vanessa managed to narrowly avoid joining her brother in a federal cell, but the cost of her freedom stripped away every ounce of her fabricated vanity. When the FBI laid out the reality of a 10-year sentence for identity theft and wire fraud, the golden child immediately folded. She turned state's evidence testifying against Derek and fully cooperating with the authorities to dismantle the offshore shell companies. She was granted 5 years of strict federal probation, but was ordered to pay back every single cent of the restitution. Without a wealthy husband to fund her lavish lifestyle, Vanessa was forced to enter the actual workforce for the very first time in her 31 years of life. She currently works grueling 10-hour shifts at a local fast food drive-through window. Her perfectly manicured nails are chipped and permanently stained with grease. She wears a cheap polyester uniform visor and hands out paper bags of French fries to customers who do not give her a second glance. The parasites were successfully excised. As for the hosts, we are thriving. I sat across from Jamal at a small marble table inside a luxury European cafe in the heart of downtown Boston. The afternoon sun streamed through the large glass windows, warming the quiet, elegant space. Jamal looked completely rejuvenated. The heavy exhaustion that used to haunt his eyes was entirely gone. He had secured a rapid, ruthless divorce, protecting his medical license and his home. Without Vanessa draining his bank accounts and his energy, he had just been promoted to the head of orthopedic surgery at his hospital. We raised our porcelain espresso cups, clinking them together over the center of the marble table. We were not toasting to revenge, we were toasting to absolute freedom. My own life had transformed into exactly what I always worked for. My elite accounting firm was so impressed with how I handled the extortion and fraud case that they promoted me to a senior managing partner position. I recovered every single dollar that was stolen from my accounts. My stock portfolios and retirement funds were locked behind impenetrable legal firewalls. I walked out of that toxic marriage with my career, my wealth, and my dignity completely intact. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looking directly at you. The truth about financial predators is that they always rely on your silence and your misguided sense of loyalty. They expect you to fold under the pressure of societal expectations. Never let the title of family turn you into a victim. If they want to play dirty with your money, make sure you know how to do the math. Hit subscribe if you love seeing karma served cold.